Hello, it's Dawn Michelle and welcome back to my channel. Today I am going to share with you all of the decks that I worked with and books and all the other things that I got into in July of 2022. We'll also take a look at my tarot journal, which I did back in a print book again. I'd been digitally journaling for a while, and for this particular month, because of the work that I was doing with the membership of my channel, I was doing Fae work, and so I decided to get a Fae book and do some good old handcrafted collage in my tarot journal. So let's go ahead and jump in with the decks that I worked with throughout the month. So I did the bulk of my tarot practice this month was the monthly medicine, which is the guided tarot practice that I do as part of the membership on my channel. I'll move this deck out of the way. And for this particular month in July, we were working with guides. So the idea of a guiding energy. And I probably, now that I think about it, should start with the deck that I actually used as my guides, which is the Heart of Faeries Oracle. Now, I do apologize, this is out of print, but this is the deck that I use, so it's the one we're going to talk about. I do have the other Brian Froud Faeries deck, which I showed in my Forest and Fae collection video, but to be perfectly honest, I really didn't end up working with that deck much this month. I think I pulled it out on occasion, but I much prefer the Heart of Faeries. Again, I know out of print deck, sorry, it can be very hard to get a hold of. It can be ridiculously expensive as well. But it just has such a really cool Fae energy to it. And for me, this particular deck and the Fae within this deck are definitely more approachable for me. Again, I talked about that in the Forest and Fae video, so I won't go into too much detail here. But one of the things that I used this deck for this month was every week at the beginning of the monthly medicine for the guided tarot practice, we pulled a guide to help us on our journey throughout the week, and we did additional readings and things like that, and that's where the John Bauer will come in, which we'll look at here in a moment. But I pulled one of these Fae cards. Now, I did use this deck for other readings throughout the month as well. Sometimes if I was feeling a little bit like I don't know what's going on right this 5 minutes, I actually found that this deck was really great to pull a Fae to kind of point me in the right direction of what's going on or what I need to be focusing on. This deck is just an excellent deck for focus cards or for a guide, an energy to kind of tell you this is the direction to go. This is what to keep in mind. And this deck works beautifully for that. I absolutely love the artwork in it. It is definitely similar to the Brian Froud's Fairy Oracle, the one that is still currently available. So if you can't get a hold of this one, I think that one is a great substitute. However, they do have very different energies for me. I keep leaving those cards in. And so I wouldn't really compare them. I don't think that while they're similar, they aren't exactly the same. So I definitely do want to kind of stipulate that. But again, being that this is out of print and hard to get a hold of, I think the Faeries Oracle is a good alternative. I'll just do a quick flip through, although if you saw the Forest and Fae video, you know, you saw this deck already in that. These Fae feel much more like Fae. Like I feel like this deck is, like I've mentioned it in the video too, a portal into the actual Fae character, like a way to tap into these individuals. And they're really cool, and I do really enjoy this deck, and I definitely will foresee myself using it. But in all honesty, throughout the month of July, I pretty much just worked exclusively with the Heart of Faeries rather than integrating both of these decks, which is kind of what I thought I was going to do, or what I was planning to do throughout the month. That didn't end up happening. I ended up using this exclusively as my guides, and then pulling cards for a message whenever I just any time of the day when I was like, I don't know what to do now, or I'm feeling a little bit overwhelmed, or like I don't know, I need a little bit of direction. This deck is fantastic for that. It's just every time I pull it, and I did work with it in conjunction with the guidebook, although, which I'll pull out here. I do have to say that the guidebook for the Faeries Oracle is actually a much better book for talking about working with Fae in general. This book really is just all about the correspondences to the individual cards. It's beautifully written, and I really enjoyed it. I definitely got into into the guidebook every time I pulled a card with this deck. Although the keywords are actually pretty expansive, so I don't think you necessarily need to, but I definitely did. So just in all, you know, all transparency of my tarot practice, I very heavily relied on the guidebook, but I also just went with what intuitively was coming to me through these cards as well, and what they were trying to convey and tell me. I really enjoyed having each a guide, a Fae guide every week. That's definitely a practice that I could see myself doing again. And but also I really just enjoyed having them as kind of, I'm a little bit just, I don't know, lost in the moment, right? And it would just be a momentary thing, but I would pull a card from this deck and I would get a Fae to kind of help guide me through where I should be focusing, like what's the next step. So again, this is a beautiful focus deck. I don't want to harp too much on it because it is out of print and hard to get. But the deck I used for the monthly medicine readings was the John Bauer Tarot. So I had my Fae deck that I pulled, my Fae to be my guide for the week, and then I pulled readings around that with the John Bauer. And this is a deck that I also featured. All the decks that I'm showing this month are going to be decks that you've already seen on my channel, so I do apologize for the repetition, but I do try to keep the content on my channel fairly in alignment with what I'm actually doing. Definitely the monthly wrap-ups, right? The monthly reflections, because that's all about my tarot practice this month. And my tarot practice this month was all about working with this sort of Fae, fairy tale energy, which very much related to the monthly medicine because that was the guiding energy that I was working with through the month. So the John Bauer is a deck that I repurchased specifically for this purpose, specifically to work with for the monthly medicine. It's a deck that I had heavily modified the first time I had it, and I talked about that in the Second Chances video, so I won't go back into too much detail here. But this time I'm intending to keep it just the way it is. I did end up edging it in just brown Crayola. I think it needs more, but I haven't gotten to that point yet. This is very much a fairy tale, or as I like to call it, Fae tale story. That's like my new favorite term because I've been working with Fae in relation to story too. We'll talk about that a little bit more when we get into the book section because I have a book that relates to this. But I really loved working with this deck. I do kind of tend to step away from the tarot associations though when I work with this deck, and I do tend to use it more intuitively. It does have a great little guidebook, and you really do kind of, I think, need to be open to the idea of looking at the tarot through a different lens when you work with this particular deck, particularly if you read with a little guidebook, because it does go its own way, which is fantastic. I don't have a problem with the tarot deck that goes its own way. I think that's great. It provides us with the opportunity to look at things through a different lens, to explore the tarot through a different idea. But I read this deck very intuitively because these images just spark my intuitive feelings, right? Or however you express that. They spark my intuition. And whenever I lay cards from this deck, I always get this just real quick, like almost like stepping into a story, right? Where it's just this instant kind of message. Yep, that's what it's trying to tell me. And it doesn't always relate to the tarot associations or what I would relate to the tarot association. Because this is the Five of Swords, which to me, generally the Five of Swords would be a sort of disruption of the mind. 5 is a disruptive number, swords are the suit of the mind, just very, very basic, right? A disruption within the mindset. But that's not what this card tells me intuitively. This card tells me intuitively, and it speaks to me intuitively of longing. And that's what I see in this card, because this figure almost looks like they're looking at this person who's leaving on the boat and they are longing for them. It's been a missed opportunity. And those are all things that just intuitively come to me from working with this artwork, from looking at it and allowing myself to step away from the tarot associations a little bit and read it based on what is it reflecting for me? Because for me, that's what tarot is. It's a mirror. It reflects back to me what I need to know. And so I like to honor that. For me, this Seven of Cups, I love the Seven of Cups because generally we see the Seven of Cups in that Rider-Waite-Smith where it's kind of pie in the sky. You have all of these choices. We tend to see it, I think a lot of times in its more negative connotation where it's like there's too many choices or you're putting out too many things and you're not focusing and things like that, which I think can be very true. But it's also for me very dependent on the situation and the context of the reading. I very rarely just take my cards at face value, because usually there's other cards on the table, there's questions, there's context, there's things that go into a reading besides just looking at it at face value. But this deck, this particular Seven of Cups to me doesn't speak to any of that. This particular Seven of Cups to me, I see it in almost a Nine of Swords kind of fear, nightmarish kind of a way. But she looks very determined, and I don't feel like she's running from these characters. I feel like she's leading the pack. I feel like she's the one that's you know, got her all of her shadowy animals and energy here, and she's like taking them out, and she is going and she is getting stuff done with this. To me, this card is very fierce. It's very much about not letting the fears keep you from making those decisions. It's not about, you know, trying to decide what to do. It's about it's a reminder that you can't let those fears hold you back from those decisions. And I love that about this card. There's so much good in this deck. It was one that I knew when I rehomed it real quickly afterwards that was a mistake, and that's okay. Sometimes that happens. I never really am sad about rehoming a deck, because I know they always go to a new home where they will be well loved and appreciated, and I don't have a problem with that at all. But I definitely knew that once I rehomed it, this was a deck that I was going to need to get back into my collection, because it just has this beautiful depth, intuitive depth to it, and I really enjoy working with it. And it works beautifully for working and to expand the readings of my guides. I didn't necessarily pair it with anything. I just used it as a straight tarot, just did my readings, and, you know, got my messages from it in that way, although I did have my fairy guide as kind of my overall energy for the week. So at the end of the week for the monthly medicine, we have this opportunity to kind of look back and wrap things up and to kind of explore what we've learned that week. And I like to pull an oracle card a lot of the time to help me look at where things have grown and expanded for me. And for this, again, another out of print deck. This is the Tree Whisper Oracle, the Secret Garden Edition by Mags Black. This is, I'm sorry to keep singing the praises of out of print decks, but this is an amazing deck and I absolutely love it. Again, I showed this in the Forest and Fae video, so I won't dwell on it too much, but this is a deck that has kind of really created some deep personal connection for me. I see these trees as like almost ancestral energy. I feel like they have this wonderful guiding energy to them. There's great expansive keywords on the cards. And this was the deck that I used to wrap up the end of the week for the practice in the monthly medicine, where I would look back at my guide, I would look back at my reading that I did with the John Bauer, and then I would pull a card from the Tree Whisper to kind of help me tap into, you know, what that experience was for me, what I learned, where I grew. You'll see all that reflected in my journal as well. So I won't dwell on it too long because I know this is out of print and difficult to get a hold of. But you know, if you can, it's totally worth it in the end. Beautiful backs. It's just an absolutely stunning deck. And I love Mags's work, so I'm happy to have this. And so that was the 3 decks that I used for the monthly medicine. I had the Tree Whisper to wrap up my week, my John Bauer to do my readings with, and then my Heart of Faeries, sorry, I'm not gonna pull them back out of the bags, to provide me with my guide throughout the week, as well as just some guidance throughout the month as I needed. So that was my monthly medicine decks. So every Sunday, and I just realized this is another out of print deck, and I apologize, but you know, like I said, I'm sharing with you what I worked with this month, and my apologies for showing out of print decks, but these are the decks that I worked with. Every Sunday I do a simple Sunday spread on my public Facebook group. It's just a simple 3-card reading, and for me it's a way to just kind of wrap up the week, kind of take a moment for myself. A lot of times they're very self-care oriented, and I used this deck, which is the Folklore Tarot, I do believe. and I'm not even sure where, I don't even remember where I came across this deck, but I found it for a really decent price on eBay. The box was trashed. It didn't have a little guidebook, but all the cards were here. And again, this is another deck that I talked about in the Forest and Fae, so I won't go too far into it, but I really enjoyed working with this deck. This deck kind of makes me giggle. And just to kind of wrap up the week, which is what my Sunday spreads are for me, and why, you know, and I post them for anybody else who'd like to do them, but it's just a way for me to kind of really nicely wrap up the week, to spend a little time with my cards, and to just kind of have a nice little ritual, a nice little reading at the end of my week. I pulled this Lady of Cups several times as well. And this deck was just fantastic for that, because it's a little bit funny, it's a little bit soothing, it's a little bit comforting, but also it's a little bit funny. And I really, really enjoyed working with it. Again, I apologize, it is out of print. It has some really funky stuff going on in the artwork, which just makes me giggle. I did edge mine. I think I mentioned that in the video as well. But yeah, it's the deck that I used for all of my Sunday readings, my simple Sunday readings. So again, that was another wonderful deck that I enjoyed working with, Forest Folklore Tarot. Okay, let's talk about a couple other decks that I worked with on and off throughout the month. One of the decks that I worked with was the Stolen Child Tarot, and this one I was kind of using as sort of an inner child work, so to speak, which is work that I want to dive into a bit more at some point. It's a little bit of a larger size tarot deck, like it's a little bit closer to oracle size, but it's on this great, really flexible linen cardstock, shuffles beautifully. This deck is really, really cool. Again, I didn't pair it with anything. I didn't really do any pairings this month, which is odd for me, but I was really focused in on trying to make that Fae connection and to do the Fae work. It was totally new for me. I think I've dabbled with it here and there, but it was really a new experience for me to really get in touch with that and to work with that and to see how it works for me. What does it mean for me? And I originally started, I'm thinking Fae, fairy, like kind of childlike play, wonder. No, Fae and fairy, very, very different energies for me. There can be some playful energy to the work that I did with Fae, but it was very much, it was very serious most of the time. It wasn't fun, playful, kind of like some of my other fairy decks are. But I did want to incorporate a little bit of that play and fun stuff in there, a little bit of that childlike wonder, which again relates back to a book that I was reading. Again, another book we've already seen on my channel, but we'll talk about it here as well. So this book that I was reading was really talking about embracing the childlike wonder of the world. And so I decided to work with the Stolen Child Tarot, which is a newer deck in my collection, to help me dive into that. So you won't see any of this work reflected in my tarot journal, because this is something that I did in a separate journal. A lot of times when I have very specific practices that I'm doing, I will do those in separate journals so that anytime I come back to that practice, I can look back at what I've done in relation to it. So my tarot journal just tends to be kind of like my overall tarot journey throughout the month, just kind of my everyday type of readings, or the monthly work that I'm doing. And then when I have specific work that I'm doing, I tend to have different journals that I create specifically for that. And so this was one of those instances where I didn't create it, it's just a purchase journal, but I have a separate journal that I have been starting with this inner child work in here and working alongside the Stolen Child Tarot. This is another deck that I've just been reading very intuitively. I have somewhat paid attention to the tarot correspondences, but it's really about what does this artwork evoke in me? What do these cards and what does this message pull out of me? How does it bring a sense of wonder? And that was really how I approached each of these readings that I did with this deck, each of the cards that I pulled from this deck. And I tried to connect with this deck once a day. So sometimes it was a single card pull, sometimes it was a 3 card to get a little bit more robust reading, but sometimes I would just pull a single card and then I would journal a little bit about what wonder I found in the card, because that was really what I was trying to get at, was experiencing the world and looking at things through that sense of play, through that sense of wonder. And this deck it worked phenomenally for that. I'm sure that this deck would be wonderful for a lot of different practices, but for that specific practice that I was doing, as pulling a card and then journaling about where I found the wonder in that card, what enchantment I found within that card. You might recognize these words from the video I did on the creating a spread out of the Enchanted Life book, because that was the main book that I was reading throughout the month. This deck was just absolutely fantastic for pulling a single card and looking at it and going, where is the wonder here? Where is the something different? Where is the sense of play, the sense of curiosity? Where can I find that in that card? And then continuing that journaling into, what does that mean to me personally, right? How does that make me feel? What does that make me think of? And this deck is just absolutely amazing for that process. That was how I used it, was to just, you know, shuffle. Let's just do it real quick. I haven't edged it yet, and I don't know if I will. Maybe like a pale yellow. I mean, these are important decisions, right? Shuffles beautifully. Love the way this deck shuffles. Gorgeous, gorgeous linen cardstock. So I would shuffle the deck, and I would kind of just take a moment to kind of have this little mini sort of meditation where I was kind of just thinking about connecting with the inner child, right? Connecting with that sense of wonder and that sense of play. And then I would split the deck and pull a card, and then I would look at, where is the wonder in this card? Where is the enchantment? And what do I see? And oh my goodness, I love this little child playing with these narwhals. Ocean creatures, whales, things like that are very, very special to me. They're very much a part of my personal practice. You may have heard me say a million times before, orca and whale, but primarily orca is definitely a very important animal to me. So whenever I get a card that has marine life on it, that's really usually quite powerful for me. But I would look at this and go, where's the sense of wonder? Where's the sense of play for me? What does that make me feel? And then I would journal about that. And it's also kind of a deck that just, the experience of doing that, of working with it in that way, even with some of the cards that could be a little bit more challenging, like the devil here. I mean, we have this snake here that's confronting these rats or these mice children. That can be a little confronting and it can be a little scary, but it also allowed me to really look at, where can you still find wonder and enchantment in the hard things, right? In the challenges of life. And it was a wonderful experience. I think I'm sounding like a broken record, but it really was. It was very powerful, very enlightening experience to be able to kind of step away from all of the kind of stress and strain of everyday life, and to just take a moment and look for that moment of play, that moment of wonder in the world, and to see the goodness that lies beyond, even in the hard times. So I really, really enjoyed that. Again, not a deck that I paired with anything. I just worked with it on its own, but it was beautiful for that process. I'm definitely looking forward to finding out where else I can incorporate this deck into my practice, because I think it does have the potential to do more than just what I did with it. But it was a wonderful experience to do that very specific work with it and to use it in that very specific way. So now another deck that I worked with, and you'll have seen this one because this one showed up in the Forest and Fae and the Second Chances. Again, you know, the decks that I work with are the decks that we tend to see. This is the Tarot of a Secret Forest. Is a deck that I have repurchased. It's the one that has the images on the back, which I do generally make use of, but not this time. This time I was doing something a little bit more specific with it. This is a deck that for me is very much taps into the emotional landscape, and I don't know why some of the cards are upside down, which is weird. I did some very specific emotional energy readings with this deck. Again, it's not something that's going to be in my tarot journal, because when I tend to do those type of readings, it's not always something I journal about, for one, because sometimes it's just I need to know right here and now what's going on, and I need to make sense of that in the moment. And the thing about emotional states is they're not permanent, right? Your emotional landscape ebbs and flows, and so I don't always really get into the nitty-gritty of writing down every little detail when I do a a reading based on something that's going on emotionally for me, unless it is a very long-term thing that I'm working on, right? Or maybe in relation to a very long-term situation or relationship or something like that. But when it's more of these in the moment things, and I'm just kind of needing a little bit of clarity of what is going on right now, and I'm trying to make sense of my feelings, this is a fantastic deck for that. I don't tend to journal about it because I tend to do my reading. I'll leave the cards sit out for a while. That I'll definitely do. I always take a picture because then I have a visual record of it somewhere, you know, on my phone or my iPad or something like that. I have a visual record of it. It's always date stamped when you take a picture of it. So I can come back to it at any point if I need to, but it's more about being in the moment, and it's not about recording it for long-term reflection, right? Which is a lot of what tarot journaling is for me when I look at tarot journaling like this, or tarot journaling that I did with the stolen child. Those are more available to me for long-term reflections because I can look back and see how situations have changed, how things have grown, how things have shifted. And that to me is important because it helps me see where I'm growing. It helps me see what I have left to do. It helps me to see where things are going and what I need to do moving forward. But when we're looking at an emotional landscape reading, when I come to the cards because I need some clarity on what's going on in my emotional realm, and I'm just kind of tapping into that because that's what this deck is for me. I do have other decks that I go to if I specifically have questions about kind of what's going on in my mind, what's going on in my body, what's going on in my kind of at a soul level, on a spiritual level. This one for me is the emotional realm one. And so I will pull cards. I will just do my readings. Generally, like I said, I generally switch the cards around half and half, but for this particular thing that I was doing this month, which was just kind of getting some clarity about some things that I have going on in my personal life, like personally with me, going on within me, within my emotional landscape. So I would pull a couple cards, generally 3, to kind of look at what's the landscape of that for me and how am I feeling right now. And the cards would often kind of tap into and mirror back what it is I was feeling. It's just a great way for me to get some clarity on what's going on within me and to kind of step outside of that emotional energy that I'm feeling in the moment and kind of be able to look at it from a little bit of a distance perspective and go, okay, that's kind of what's going on. I see that now. And then I can decide what I need to do moving forward with that. Do I need to do anything with it, or can I just, you know, simply acknowledge that that is the emotional landscape that I'm currently in, and then accept it and move on? Because sometimes that's just what you need to do, right? Emotions are fleeting. You can be happy one moment and sad the next, and based on whatever's going on in your life. And sometimes I just need a little bit of clarity, but it doesn't need to be, you know, this long-term drawn out process. I just need a little clarity right here, right now. So the last kind of foresty fairy tale deck that I have to share with you, and I do have 2 other decks that I do want to share that have absolutely nothing to do with this kind of theme or realm that we're in currently. But before we move on to those, I do want to talk about Into the Lonely Woods. I think I've talked about this. It might have been with my members. And I have been using this deck. I pulled this card out. I keep pulling this card out to show people. I pulled it out to show in the Weavers live chat that we did, and I also pulled it out to show somebody else. But I absolutely love this deck. And there's my Ludo card. Again, this is another one that I showed in the Forest and Fae video. This deck is the one that I've been using for everyday card pulls. So every morning when I come to sit at my computer, when I come into my space, the first thing I do is turn my computer on. That's just like that. And then usually I make my way over here to do whatever readings that I'm going to do for the day. And then I kind of go back to the computer and do things, you know, whatever needs to be done there. But I found that because the first thing I do is kind of switch on the computer and then move into whatever needs to happen over here in terms of practice and space. If I have something that's pressing, I will do my tarot work, my journaling, my spiritual stuff. I'll do that later in the day. It doesn't always necessarily happen first thing in the morning. It's kind of whenever I can give it the time and attention that it deserves. That's when I do it. But what I found was that I really liked just starting my day with these little creatures. it's just, I don't know. And they were so spot on. They were so spot on a lot of the time, just kind of giving me that message that I really needed for the day. I did find it to be a very comforting deck most of the time, but there were a couple of cards in there that also challenged me a little bit. And there, in fact, we'll see a reading in here where I kept getting one of these same cards over and over again for like 3 days straight. I got the same card, and I really wanted to explore what does that mean? What am I not getting here? Because clearly this deck is trying to tell me something. And I eventually worked it out. I did a reading. That one I did include in my tarot journal, so we'll see it here in a little bit. But I absolutely love this deck. Oh my goodness, it's so cute. It's so comforting. I will probably switch to another deck for August, but I gotta admit I'm a little sad to put these characters away. I prop up the card on my computer desk, so I see it all day long, because that is where I spend the majority of my time, is at my other desk across the room. And I got to sit with one of these characters every single day, and it was a beautiful experience. It's definitely one I'll be doing again. I think I mentioned I did edge mine as well. And I never got into the guidebook, I'll be perfectly honest. Well, once or twice. I think, well, when my stalker card came up, I got into the guidebook, but I didn't need to. I didn't need to get into the guidebook. And to me, that's a hallmark of a good oracle. It's there if I want it, if I want to dive in deeper, like I did with that one stalker card. But for the most part, it was just all about these images and these key phrases at the bottom. That was all I needed. And like, that's my Ludo card. I mentioned it in the Forest and Fae. If you've seen Labyrinth, this deck reminds me of Ludo, and that is my 100% Ludo card, which is just gives me all the feels, and I love it. So it was a beautiful, beautiful experience to spend a month just pulling a single card from this deck every day to be my card for the day. It sat on my desk with me all day long. I got to enjoy it. I got to see it. But as you'll see when we do look through my tarot journal, I did actually end up using it a couple times for some readings, because there were some cards that kept coming up and some things that I wanted to tap into. And so it did work beautifully for that. But I haven't used it in like full-fledged readings too much. I've mostly just been spending a month getting to know these characters and using the card for a daily card pull, and it was just absolutely beautiful. I really enjoyed it, and we'll definitely be doing it again. So before we take a flip through my tarot journal, I do just want to talk about the 2 books that have been kind of foundational in my work in July. I am currently reading a fiction book as well, which is the second book in the Hell's Library series, which is Archive of the Forgotten. I didn't bring it out because I'm not finished with it yet, so maybe we'll take a look at that at the end of this month. But the 2 books that I read and worked with very heavily in July were The Enchanted Life by Sharon Blackie, Reclaiming the Magic and the Wisdom of the Natural World. I spoke about this book in my video I did on making a tarot spread from a book. This is really a beautiful book about kind of learning to re-see the world as magical, tapping into that idea of wonder and magic and enchantment. So we have like, what is enchantment? You know, inhabiting the living world, seeing the world as being magical in and of itself. We have the magic of every day, you know, coming home to ourselves, kinship with others. Then we have the enchanted life for, you know, kind of this, how we might go about kind of living the enchanted life. There are stories in here from other people as well. In all honesty, in this sort of review of this book, I did kind of skip over some of those. Tended to read the ones that were speaking directly from Sharon Blackie herself. I had a tendency to read those more than the others. Some of them just didn't quite speak to me as much as others, but the general basis of the book, the general idea of tapping into the sense of wonder and enchantment was really, really wonderful. As I've mentioned many times before in many various videos, I have read this one and the book If Women Rose Rooted, also by Sharon Blackie, and I've said it before, I will say it again, I wish I had read these when my kids were younger. If anybody has younger children, I definitely recommend you give these 2 books a read. They're fantastic, and they definitely give you a different perspective, because both of those books really do kind of deal with childhood in a sense. For me, it was just, again, it was helping me tap into that sort of looking at the world through that world of enchantment, through wonder. You know, as I mentioned, it was kind of the catalyst for my work with the Stolen Child Tarot, but it also very much played into my work with the Fae this month as well, and just kind of stepping back from the the harshness of everyday reality and being able to see that there is still wonder and magic within the world. And I think that's really beautiful and was definitely something that I needed this month. So that was The Enchanted Life. The other book that I read, which is gigantic, but we're going to go ahead and try to fit it in here, is The Illustrated Treasury of Swedish Folk and Fairy Tales. Now, my husband is of Swedish lineage, so it also felt very appropriate in that sense. But the big thing is it's illustrated by John Bauer. So it went beautifully with my John Bauer tarot. This is one of those books that we kind of just dipped in and out of, reading the stories. Again, it is gigantic. The stories are written by various people, but you'll recognize like some of the cards that we see in the John Bauer tarot. And like it's a book of fairy tales, but it's so good. This was definitely a great way for me to, again, tap into that sense of childlike wonder, bringing a little bit of that fae energy in as well, but also just really looking at seeing the world through that enchanted lens. Again, we sat and we would just flip through and find a story and we would read it. And I mean, I read some of them on my own. There's many of the illustrations that we see in the tarot deck as well, which was kind of fun. So you could, when I would find one that I'm like, oh, I recognize that, I would go get the card out as well, and I would see what the tarot association was of the card. It was a beautiful, beautiful practice. It's definitely something that I will be doing again. And I would love to find more books to do this with, because that was a lot of fun and we really, really enjoyed the experience. That is The Illustrated Treasury of Swedish Folk and Fairy Tales. So the last thing that I have to share with you today is my tarot journal. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I had been previously doing digital tarot journaling, and I've really, really enjoyed that. But for this particular month, doing the Fae work and kind of trying to tie into that inner child type of an essence, I really wanted to get like back to the hands-on kind of creative approach to journaling. Not that digital journaling isn't creative, because it very much is, but this is a different type of creative. It's very tactile in its experience. So I bought this book. It's just a little paper blanks. Yeah, paper blanks journal called The Olive Fairy. It's a little 5x7 line journal, and to be perfectly honest, the space was a little tight, and when I'm doing creative journaling like this, I definitely have realized that I prefer a dot grid journal, but this one worked. So I did quite a bit of collaging in here. I used some stickers up. It's not super fancy, because I really wanted to focus more in on the practice as a whole, not just getting so caught up in the journaling aspect of it. I really wanted to give equal time and equal attention to all the different aspects of the practice that I brought together on the whole. So I just created a very simple title page with the main decks that I was using for this practice this month. So you can see all of those there. I did a month ahead spread. This self-belief card came up toward the end of the month for me, so that was kind of fun. That was the Tree Whisperer message. And you can see here that I integrated the different decks that I was using. We have the John Bauer, the Tree Whisperer, the Forest Folk, and the two Fairies. Again, I didn't use the Fairies Oracle that often, but I did pull it on occasion. So I have that reading here, which was just kind of starting my month ahead. I have left this blank because there are some personal things that I want to include in here, and so I decided to wait till after I film this to come back and write my reflections, but this is the space for me to reflect on the month, and I could have definitely put that at the end of the month as well, but I decided to just kind of put it right after the front page, kind of the month ahead, so that I could look back at this reading and then reflect on the month for me. Again, this is something that I want to do after I show this, show my journal publicly. There are occasionally private things that I do not like to share on YouTube. So we have the simple Sunday spreads, and you can see that I did a lot of like torn paper collaging. Some of the cards I took pictures of and printed. Some of them I threw on my scanner and made color copies of to put in here. Always using my date stamp, because I love my little date stamper. Here's the monthly medicine. So again, we started each week with a guide, and my guide that I pulled, and then we had the actual reading. I did not include all the cards from my monthly medicine reading in my journal. I did write down what I got, but I just made a color copy and included the one card that really spoke to me the most, so that I would remember when I come back and look through here that that's the card that really spoke to me, so that's the one I want to pay attention to. And again, I used a lot of book page, a lot of book page in this particular layout. And here was the reflection at the end of the week with my tree whisper. And again, another Sunday reading. And you'll see that this is pretty much the layout that I followed all throughout the month, because this was the structure of my tarot practice this month. Pulling my guide on Monday, doing my medicine reading on Wednesday, looking at my reflections on Friday, doing my Sunday reading on Sunday, and then all the other work I did kind of in between all of that. So it's a wonderful kind of flow. I like the sort of ritual repetition of it, because it keeps my tarot practice kind of always moving forward, but it doesn't feel like it gets super bogged down in the trying to hit specific benchmarks either. So it works really well for me, and that's the setup for the monthly medicine, which seems to work really well for most of my members. So you can see here just a lot of collaging, a lot of writing. Here was the big reading that I did on that stalker card. This was my stalker card for the month. I can turn it around, from the Lonely Woods. I pulled that card 3 days in a row. So then I pulled from my Llewellyn, because that deck to me is very tied into like me on a personal level. So I pulled that to see kind of what is going on, because the title on this card is The Return of the Lost Selves. So I felt like it was really speaking to me on that deep personal level. So I pulled the Llewellyn, and then I also pulled a Tree Whisper as kind of a wrap up, and that was my reading for that, kind of figuring out why that card kept coming up for me 3 days in a row. It wasn't even like it was a stalker card that kept just coming up in general. It did come up a couple of times, other times during the month, but it literally came up 3 days in a row, even after me shuffling the deck, because I was like, I'm tired of getting this card. Clearly there was a message there for me to learn. Last week of the monthly medicine with our guide, our medicine spread, and then our reflection, and then my simple Sunday. And that's pretty much it. You know, a lot of what I did was very much related to the monthly medicine, of course, following along with those prompts, doing that work. But I also got into a lot of other things this month, which was really fun. You know, reading different books, using books to help me make spreads, as we saw with the Enchanted Life book in that video that I did, reading from the illustrated fairy tale book, and then, you know, looking at that in relation to my John Bauer tarot, doing that Stolen Child, the work with the Stolen Child tarot, kind of tapping into that, looking at things from a sense of wonder and doing some journaling with that, even just down to, you know, pulling my daily card from the Into the Lonely Woods. It was so great. I felt like my practice this month was very rich and robust, and I feel like I really got beyond just pulling cards on a daily basis or just doing tarot readings. I feel like I was really able to start integrating some other practices back in. That definitely ebbs and flows for me. Sometimes I'm better at it than others. So I definitely found that I was trying to incorporate that more, and it did work very beautifully. It did come about very naturally. So when we try to kind of force ourselves to do particular practices or integrate certain things into our practice, sometimes it can feel very forced, and it doesn't feel very natural, and it doesn't happen in a very meaningful way, because we're just trying to kind of slot that square peg in a round hole. But this month did feel very natural. It felt very organic. I pulled things that I felt called to pull. I didn't force myself to do any sort of practice or anything. I just pulled things as I felt like I wanted to, or as I needed to, you know, pulling from decks when I needed to, following that monthly medicine practice, which does give me a really great kind of backbone structure for my tarot practice, but then allowing myself to play and to do other things with it. So it was really fantastic. I really enjoyed it. Moving into August, we are working with the moon for monthly medicine, so that's super exciting. I know a lot of us are really excited about that one. So anyway, yeah, that was my tarot practice in July. It was a lot of fun. Again, it's not always just about the tarot, right? So sometimes it's integrating other things into the work as well, and that's always exciting, always fun. Journaling, card pulls, reading books, things like that. It's all part of the integrated whole for me. So anyway, that's it for me for July, and I'm really looking forward to what I'm going to be doing in August. It's going to be really exciting. I have lots of great videos planned as well, so that's always fun. So I hope that you had a wonderful July. I wish you many blessings moving into August. As always, you'll find links for everything I've shown here in the description box below for you. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I look forward to sharing with you again soon.